Good afternoon, and welcome to Theatre's New Realities and this panel dedicated to making processes and strategies for collaborative media-focused theatre making, including approaches to AR and VR performance. Our panelists today, Tim White and Andy Lavender, are themselves collaborators with a history of creating work together in this space, including some very fresh work in development, which they're sharing with audiences through Theatre's New Realities. So you can access this new work through the virtual theatre page of the new Theatre's New Realities webpage, where you can download a PC version of the full interactive experience. So for any Mac users such as myself or others for any reason unable to view in that format, there is also a walkthrough video, I believe, available on YouTube. Is that correct, Tim? Yep. And I think we're also going to share some snippets of that to start us off today as well, to give you all a bit of context on what Tim and Andy have been working on. But first, it's my great pleasure to introduce our panelists, Andy Lavender and Tim White. Andy Lavender is Vice Principal and Director of Production Arts at Guildhall School of Music and Drama in London. His practice-based research includes Agamemnon Redux, which explores motion capture for live performance, part of the Mask and Avatar project conducted with colleagues from Paris University and Warwick. His writing includes the monograph Performance in the 21st Century, Theatres of Engagement from Routledge, articles in performance journals, and recently a chapter on multimodal performance in a book entitled Intermediate Theatre, Principles and Practice. He is series editor of 4x45, published by Digital Theatre and Routledge. Tim White is Director of Education in the School of Creative Arts, Performance and Visual Culture, University of Warwick. His teaching and research interests include food and performance, immersive practice, online performance, video, and performance in public spaces. His most recent publication is the concluding essay in Occasions of State, part of Routledge's American Festival Studies series. He has collaborated with Andy Lavender on a series of digital projects. I'm Åste Amundsen, and I'll be your host for this panel. My background is as a theatre maker and in immersive festival environments, amongst other things. So while my work has been very much about employing technology within performance, it has typically dealt more so with bringing tech to solving issues of interaction and audience narrative in real time in physical spaces. So although, as with many of you probably here today, I'm very curious, increasingly curious about the possibilities that are presented through mixed reality platforms for theatre making. Oh yeah, and I should say I'm here partly as I'm a doctoral practice researcher with Story Futures with Royal Holloway Drama, as well as media arts, looking at personalization of live interactive audience experiences. So I believe we're going to start with an intro to the new project that Tim and Andy has been working on, but then begins a journey in my head. I'll let them introduce this project, as they'll do, give you a lot more scope, and I'm sure we'll also get to see some snippets from this work as well. So now it's my pleasure to hand you over to Tim and Andy. Welcome.
Thank you very much. So perhaps maybe Andy, you want to start by framing the project and then give me a heads up with any particular sonnet that you want to go from there.
Yeah, okay. So this work comes out of some earlier discussion with Aneta Mancevic, who's curated today's event, about engaging in a practice-based inquiry into the use of augmented realities, mixed reality, virtual reality, in relation to live performance. And at that point, we were particularly looking to develop that work engaging with Shakespeare and thinking about a play to do. And Tim came up with the idea of looking at the sonnets instead. And this seemed immediately interesting because it's a collection that has shared themes and so forth, but on the other hand is quite plural and very slippery in various ways. We were going to do a sort of work in progress type workshop that people could drop into prior to coronavirus. And then given the coronavirus situation, we've slightly accelerated some of the development in order to put something online. So what you'll see is a sort of first pass. We've just stood some things up in a workshop type manner, but of course the workshopping largely has been done actually at Tim's desk. We've worked with 3 actors to record 14 sonnets in order to present 14 worlds and a kind of access to each sonnet. So I won't say anything more about that at this point, and hand over to Tim perhaps for a bit of a demo.
Okay, well, we worked with 3 performers, and so I've extrapolated 3 different sonnets from the work that showcases each of the 3 performers. So in no particular order, maybe I'll show one, and then if Andy, you want to comment in particular about one. So we might start off with The Expense of Spirit in Waste of Shame, which is Sonnet 129, I believe. So I'm just queuing this up now. And if are we sharing that now? Can you see that?
Yep.
I can see the list.
Okay.
But not the video if you're playing it, Tim.
I am playing the video, and it should be right. Just bear with me. I understand what's happening now.
This was working in our test just before we came on stream live.
We seem to have lost Tim altogether.
Yeah, should we keep talking then,
Yes.
Åste? And if anybody would like to check in on the work, there's a link on the project on the seminar information, but then there's also the link in the chat to the video, and if it's not in the chat, I think it will appear in the chat to the walkthrough that Tim has done. So you could add at some point.
Oh, brilliant.
Right, I'm back. Sorry, my apologies. After being given comprehensive instructions by the team here, I signally went about and ignored them. But now, hopefully my screen is being shared. So hopefully you can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
The Expense of Spirit in a Waste of Shame in action. Until action, love is turgid, murderous, bloody, full of blame, savage, extreme, rude, cruel, not to trust, enjoyed no sooner but despised, straight. Past reason hunted and no sooner had, past reason hated as a swallowed bait. On purpose laid to make the taker mad, mad in pursuit and in possession, so had, having, and in quest to have extreme, a bliss in proof and proved very woe, before a joy proposed behind, a dream. All this the world well knows, yet none knows well to shun the heaven that leads men to this hell.
Okay, I don't know if you want to comment on that, Andy?
Yeah, shall I just run through a couple of the principles that we were working with here? With respect to the 14 sonnets, we thought, okay, let's explore 14 different worlds. At this workshop stage, we've reduced that, so some of them repeat, but you can change whether it's day or night, or of course, different places in the virtual space. We've talked about, having some sort of engagement function for the spectator, visitor, participant, and in some of the sonnets they're triggered by proximity, so the sonnet begins when the visitor gets close, and that's something that assuming that we can do a next phase of work on this, we could explore and develop further. There'd also be the prospect, of course, of working in a more detailed way with the performers in a motion capture environment as well. So at the moment, the avatar action that you're seeing is all generated by Tim from within the computer. And were we to get back to a sort of more in-person phase of working, then we'd be able to do a lot more with the avatar aligned with whatever the performer does and how we think that could be fruitful. So that's some of the principles.
So can I just ask, I'm assuming from what you're saying that that way of working with an avatar representation of the actor was not the original intention. This is something that you adapted because of the COVID situation? Or?
Yeah, that's right. We've done that on the fly. I think we would have, in any case, I think, assumed that we'll be building avatars in the world and there'll be a way of the visitor engaging with them. But any kind of live interaction, which I think would be yet another phase, or any more personalized engagement by the actor, we've obviously not been able to do that.
No.
Yeah, I think I was going to add that ideally we would want the live performers to drive the avatars, whereas in this particular iteration, it's only the lip syncing that's driven by the live performers because their audio is taken, and then that generates visemes that then move the mouth according to the words they speak.
Right. That's kind of an interesting one. There's a complete sub point, but I wonder if this is a new avenue of work for lip syncing artists within this genre. Yeah, very interesting.
It's very tricky because you need, if anyone familiar with working this way, the skeletal body of the avatar is fairly straightforward, but the degree of complexity required to move the mouth and is in itself quite challenging, and not all models come with that. And then to reduce the complexity of speech, particularly something as rich as Shakespeare, to I think it's about 8 or 9 different mouth shapes that in combination you can give the illusion that somebody is actually articulating these sounds, is something to do in and of itself is complicated, but to do that live, i.e. on the fly, requires quite a degree of precision and processing power to make it comprehensible. Absolutely.
How does that, with especially work like Shakespeare that's so where we're so focused on the enunciation and presentation of the actor, how does that feel? How does it compare generating it in that way from working with a live actor?
It's the actual working process itself is frustrating because the software will approximately mash up the text and where the text aligns with the waveform that you give it of the actor speaking. But the programs I was using, whenever they came across an apostrophed word or an archaic word, it would just not recognize it and throw out the whole kind of alignment of the text. So in the end, I ended up transliterating some of the more arcane words into words that would actually be recognized by the lip syncing engine in order to get it through. So it is approximate, but just as with the female character, we were working on at least getting eye movement in there as well. These little markers of a kind of consciousness behind the artificial being are things that I think draw you in and are things that we want to push further with.
Absolutely. Great. Are you going to show us more?
Yes, I am. I'm now prepared. I know what's happening with this switching to the stream. So when we're ready, I'm going to press play now, as if by magic.
Hurrah.
When in the Chronicle of Wasted Time I see descriptions of the fairest wights and beauty making beautiful old rhyme in praise of ladies dead and lovely knights, then in the blazon of sweet beauty's best of hand, of foot, of lip, of eye, of brow, I see their antique pen would have expressed even such a beauty as you master now. So all their praises are but prophecies of this our time, all you prefiguring. And for they looked but with divining eyes, they had not skill enough your worth to sing. For we, which now behold these present days, have eyes to wonder, but lack tongues to praise.
So again, is it worth unpacking another couple of principles here? We have the lift as a sort of holding transition area where you can obviously navigate between the scenes, sonnets, worlds in a non-linear way, and I guess again in a further phase of development, you could imagine that you might see what's on the screen in the library. We would really like to explore the extent to which the avatar is speaking directly to the visitor, and that seemed to us one of the features of moving this work into a VR environment. Of course, it's in a way definitively immersive, and you're engaged in a different way. The sonnets themselves, and I think this connects with some of the discussion in the previous panels today, to do with the relationship between content and what this particular technological setup enables. The sonnets are so shifting. They're to do with desire, having and holding or not. Some of them are direct address. They're to a second person. Very directly, the second person might be in front of you or might be imagined. So we'd very much like to explore further this sense that perhaps it's the visitor who is always the object of the sonnet, or the person who is mentioned, and that puts you in a different subject position potentially.
So just to clarify, it's a point and click navigation through this for the audience, is that right? Or it's cursor?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's driven either by a gamepad or by cursor keys or by the mouse. So the level of functionality was quite limited, just simply because we had more experience of doing the live stuff, and the whole paraphernalia of making standalone deliverables took up considerably more time than was initially appreciated. So it would be fairly trivial to add functionality like screen captures, and maybe to kind of teleport between particular areas, but at the moment the essential functionality is movement, a press button that simply activates different floors on the lift, and a pause button so that you can stop and exit the experience.
I mean, it's very interesting what you were saying, Andy, about this direct address as well, because obviously something that the people who come from screen content talk about with VR environments is this kind of the need to draw the attention of the audience in a different way than you do when you're able to frame things with cameras and so on. So, I mean, do you feel that that's an advantage as a theatre maker in these kinds of spaces? Because it's something that is posited as an advantage.
Well, good question. I'm not sure that there's a single answer. I think partly it's to do with dramaturgical decisions, you know, what the content is, what it's expressing, or enabling you to access, which might also be, you know, feelings in yourself. I think in this kind of environment, there's you know, some sort of negotiation always with rules and rewards, what you have to do and how you learn what you have to do if you don't already know it, and then where you find reward, which up to a point is part of a pleasure economy as well.
Yeah.
You talked yesterday when we were chatting about Easter eggs, you know, whether we'd put Easter eggs in this, and I suppose in this first phase, you know, if you find the actor with the sonnet, that's the Easter egg. But it would be possible to you know, think about that at a number of further levels and having other kinds of information or you know, reward functions. But yeah, and in a sense, that's all part of the technical affordance of this too. But I think I would always want to bring it back to the dramaturgical perspective. What is this journey offering, and in a way, how is it either representing or, you know, permitting you to have facilitating an experience that is, in some sense, the reason why you're engaging with this in the first place?
Absolutely. Maybe the more appropriate Easter eggs for a theatre performance is within the engagement with the actor and with the words, rather than hidden visual assets around a space or whatever. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not averse to that, and I like the proposition of Easter eggs. I think because we are coming at this fairly new, we bring with it a kind of sense of we need to get the work done before we can indulge ourselves in such kind of things, but also more tellingly, I think a certain degree of reverence that as you kind of flex more and get a sense that you can breathe and do more things with it. So it was a kind of last minute decision to leave out. There is a lobby floor which contains all the texts if you go down to, if you stay on the first floor, as well as the additional credits. And it was only because I think of that residual sense of reverence for the project and the work itself, because I wanted to put a stag in there that was just wandering back and forth and obscuring your view of the sonnets, and you had to wait for this stag to get out of the way, which may make it in a subsequent iteration, but it was a kind of nice way of disrupting the if you like, unregulated, the continual flow of information. So having people find the performer in the space, which teases us up nicely for the third one we're going to show you here, does provide, if you like, some degree of curiosity and motivation on the part of the person experiencing the work, with the obvious danger that I tried this out with someone locally, and in this particular scene, they'd actually wandered off into the hills and were a kilometre away from where anything was happening. So it was easier for me just to quit the game and tell them to just look around more purposefully. So you can end up frustrating the viewer, I think, as much as kind of rewarding them. But so maybe if I show you this one, and to kind of frame all of these, obviously you are limited by the vagaries of my ability to control a mouse, and you may want to look around somewhere else. So this is a very kind of partial and incomplete kind of notion of the experience, but I was just heading for the content to keep the video as packed as possible. So with those caveats, I'll play this now.
That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves, or none, or few, do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bare ruined choirs, where late the sweet birds sang. In me thou seest the twilight of such day as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black nights doth take away, death's second self that seals up all in rest. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire that on the ashes of his youth doth lie, as the deathbed whereon it must expire, consumed with that which it was nourished by. This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well which thou must leave ere long.
And out you go. And I suppose one other thing, just to reflect briefly here, I mean, of course, Tim's done a walkthrough in order to demonstrate various things. It would be possible to simply eyeball the avatar and listen to the sonnet. One of the things that we were interested in is just finding a way to put the sonnets on a little platform, and you make of them what you will. So there's as much or as little distraction from the world as you choose as a visitor.
It struck me just before with what you said, Tim, just before we went to that clip. I wonder if audiences wandering off is more of a challenge at the moment under COVID, because we're so restrained in our physical lives that exploring these kind of open spaces might have extra appeal that you wouldn't normally have to plan as much for, maybe.
Yeah, I can see that argument, and in some sense, once you've created such an open and expansive world, then you almost feel obligated to provide some sense of reward for that. You know, there are instances of many games where people will spend weeks traveling to the edge of a map in the hope that the programmer has recognized their kind of endurance in doing this and put some specific element there. So with many of the worlds, you know, they are furnished sufficient that you recognize them, but there is always the temptation to think, so the scene's set in the bar and we go out towards the road, to then put a car in there and have customers come into the bar, to expand this thing out, and then to create narratives that maybe you trigger as a consequence of doing something else. So you are quickly lured into the game logic and the notion of interdependencies. But you know, one has to, particularly when it's a kind of closed piece of work, one has to like sew up the deliverable and push it out to a file sharing service and wave temporarily goodbye to it. So,
I mean, is there a danger as well of the sort of seductions of that beautiful built world competing with the text that you're wanting to present as well, or?
Yeah, and I think that was more evident here than perhaps in the previous work that Andy and I have worked on, where we've been thrust together in confined spaces, which is obviously a thing of the recent past rather than now, where Andy's always been there to hold me in check, where my kind of more wild flights of fancy have been identified as such and curtailed before they sought to kind of sink the project. So there was no such mechanism in place here, but there was insufficient time really to indulge them to the level I'm surely capable of, given enough time on my own. But I don't know if you want to respond to that one.
I think the other side of that coin, though, is that visiting the worlds is also a part of the pleasure. And in some of the mock-up for this, I mean, one of the worlds that hasn't made it into this current final cut is underwater, and one of the avatars is seen sitting on a rock underwater, and it doesn't matter that it's underwater, it just happens to be underwater. And then there's another one which is in the cut at the minute, which is, you know, has a character in a burning field, and it does, in a way, it doesn't matter to the character that she's amid fire, and of course that it feels viscerally wrong, and that she's in danger, or so am I, and I therefore shouldn't go as close. But of course you can, and then of course it kind of has all sorts of other metaphorical aspects, you know, to do with burning up with love, obviously, or whatever else. So I think there are you know, dimensions and pleasures to be had in, you know, precisely locating this in this diverse set of worlds. And I guess the other aspect of the sort of game and audience agency, spectator agency end of this is that you could probably revisit a scene, or I mean, we haven't got a replay function for each sonnet. You'd have to come out of the scene and go back into it. But you know, maybe there could be that, so that you could decide that you'd like to hear a sonnet again, or that you particularly enjoyed the delivery of the sonnet and you'd like to savor that. So those could potentially be part of the texture of this too.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed, I had a bit of a play around in the sort of longer walkthrough. I was unable to locate a PC, sadly, but I really enjoyed the burning fields part of it. And I think that's, you know, maybe some of the greater pleasures, like you say, of these kinds of environments is constructing these worlds that wouldn't be normally available, and what they can add to an experience, a textual experience like that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like the sort of, I mean, of course it's not at all realist, but I quite like the quasi-realist aspect to it as well. There's one of these where the sonnet is, you know, the poet is saying, I can't sleep, and I can't sleep because I just see you. And Tim has set this in a sort of in a bedroom. The guy is lying on his bed and sort of tossing and turning, and it just gives a different purchase on the thing. So I really, you know, get interested in this kind of shift across what might be a very realist and recognizable world and situation, and then something that is either more metaphorical or even more fantastical.
Yeah, interesting. I think from the purely subjective, but I think for me, I in terms of realism, I become more aware of the distance between you know, in the more realistic environments, I'm nearly more aware of the distance between, you know, the high fidelity made world to the normal world than I would be in a more fantastical, you know, surreal environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, we've got a question come up. Are you ready for a question from our YouTube viewers? Nadia Luton asks, what are some of your preferred tech tools for world building? Do you have any traditional theatre devising methods that you consider when world building? That's a great question, I think.
In terms of the tools, I've settled on using Unreal Engine, and when we were just having a chat yesterday, there seemed to be two camps in terms of use of game engines for world building, and there are those who favour an engine called Unity, and the one we use, Unreal Engine, both of which, at least at the development point, are free to use. They can be augmented, and one can quickly rack up quite expensive production costs. But in terms of theatrical devising methods, spatially, because the possibility is to move all around rather than have a kind of backdrop or a notion of frontality, then immediately you're thinking of a more all-encompassing environment and the place of the viewer within that environment rather than separate from the scene itself. So I think that is probably a different starting point. But from your perspective, Andy, how do you come at it differently?
I think with as with many theatre production processes, it can be iterative. You can stand things up, see what you have, and develop them further. And I think that this process, which has involved some discussion with the three actors, but not very extensively in developing up the worlds, because we weren't properly able to have that engagement, has therefore largely been a sort of production line process, with Tim being the production line largely, and then we've kind of fed in some stuff to that. But I think a next phase, were we to be post coronavirus, would be to bring this now into the rehearsal room, to have these worlds in our space, to be able to work with performers and participants, visitors, as it were, which could be members of the company, to just explore how the worlds are interesting, what the journeys could be, what the interaction with the avatar could be. So in answer to the question, I'm not sure that we've really observed very much of a devising method to date, but it would be very thinkable to take this into that kind of devising process to develop it further.
Off the back of, sorry.
No, you go on, please.
I was going to say, off the back of Nadia's question, maybe it'd be useful, because the Agamemnon series that we worked on previously does use that sense of frontality or in the round. So I've just queued up the same excerpt from 3 different iterations of the production, one of which was conventional front on, using video projection of the environment. And then the second iteration was using screens all around the audience. And then the third, I think, reverted back to having one singular screen. But it's bringing the two together. But there is something, I think, lost in the fact that you are still effectively looking at a screen, albeit with the performers and the relationship between performers and the screen. So it might be interesting to show that.
Absolutely.
Now,
Yeah,
okay.
it's great.
Okay.
Couche avec lui. Après l'avoir lavé, là, dans le bain, m'en décrire ce qui va suivre. Ça arrive. Elle tend son bras en arrière, retient son mari de l'autre. Regardez, quelle est cette vision funeste? Est-ce la mort qui l'enveloppe dans son filet? Non, elle est le filet, la meurtrière. Regardez maintenant, elle le poignarde. C'est un piège. Il glisse au fond de l'eau. Elle avait prévu de le tuer depuis le début. going to do it. Your own husband. You sleep with him. Once you've washed him, there, in the bath. How can I describe how this ends? It's coming. She stretches out her hand, and now her other hand is reaching for him. Look! Look there! What this image? It is death, catching him in his net. No, she is the net, the murderer. Look now! She stabs him! Once you've washed him, there, in the bath. How can I describe how this ends? Look there. Oh, this image. Is it death catching him in his net? No, she is the net, the murderer. Look now. It's a trap. He's falling back in the bath. She planned to kill him all along.
Shall I contextualize that briefly? We worked on a project with colleagues at Parry-Wheat University who were doing a bigger exploration called Mask and Avatar, which involved actors in masks interacting with avatars in screen. So we developed an edited, potted version of Agamemnon by Aeschylus. So you can see through these examples, we were looking at, in fact, we ended up using 3 different sorts of mask in the 3 different iterations, and with some alterations to the digital design as well. But the key principle was that each of the actors would perform directly to the audience in mask, so that you could understand and potentially enjoy the performance of the masked actor doing the story, but then the story would play out in screen through the avatars, and the actors wearing the mask were also wearing motion capture suits. So it became evident that they were driving the action, a bit like puppeteers, I suppose. And in the excerpt that you've seen, the mask is of Cassandra, and Cassandra is having a vision of the murder of Agamemnon by Clytemnestra. So the actor is playing both Cassandra having the vision and doing the recounting, and Clytemnestra in scene doing the sort of stabbing, with Agamemnon played by the other performer. So of course they're spatially distant, but brought together in the digital scene.
Very interesting. I'm curious about how you when in watching the audience watching that, where their attention, do you think their attention was sort of equally split between the screen and the kind of puppeteering actors, or do you feel there was a kind of or did you intend to sort of highlight one over the other, or?
I think it's varied. Another scene in the most recent iteration it's a two-hander because we work with two performers in motion capture suits, and we use a combination of being able to switch the camera angle on the fly to the conversation going between the person behind the bar and the customer sitting at the bar to another couple of people in the same space, just so we're always in the same space and we always saw the next group of people who were going to effectively inhabit the conversation. And so you were doing this thing of checking between who was playing what character in the live space and how that character was then being played out on the screen. So it was almost as if you were doing a kind of Doctor Who like transformation of moving from one host body to another through the scene and playing with that. So I think this goes back to your earlier point about the joy of moving away from the constraint of naturalism, because there are AAA game studios that are always going to provide the benchmark that you're going to fall short of, just in terms of resource and so on, but not necessarily as keen or interested in exploring these uncanny and strange kind of moments that are possible with the combination of live and virtual.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderfully fractured kind of presentation of a character that you're able to present by doing that, by splitting the audience attention that way, which without the embodied actor there as well, I'm not sure that you could convey that with however high fidelity your presentations in a virtual space. Which brings me to an interesting question that Adam Lenson has contributed. So he exactly raises this question about narrative video games that in his experience has been growing closer to theatrical experiences and are able to offer a solo audience member a number of performers and a scale that would be financially impossible for theatre. I guess it's more of a comment, but it's an interesting one. And he follows on by asking, how do you imagine theatre pieces being able to benefit from virtual performance that would be impossible in the real world?
Well, I think one way I'd answer that is to think back to a VR production, which was also in its way an experiment that I visited at the Ars Electronica event in Linz. And this was made by somebody working in Berlin who did some scenes from an opera. I can't remember what the opera was now, but he did a proper recording with the orchestra. So in the headphones, you hear in a very detailed, rich way the playing of the orchestra, and then in the VR headset, you're on the stage. So this was in its way quite literal, in that you're on the stage of the opera with the scene, but the scene is a number of flats and there are wings, and you can wander sort of into the wings, or you can go backstage, and of course you can fly as well. And then at a certain point the singer appeared and sings directly at you from about 2 feet away, it seems, and then or you can wander around and look at the singer from another perspective and fly off or whatever. So that and I could have I know being in the VR world is in its way exhausting and makes different demands on us, but I could imagine experiencing the whole opera through that kind of treatment. So it may be, apart from anything else, I'm sure there are very many other ways, but to be inside a theatre production would be one of the offers that this technology can provide.
So I would come at it. Sorry, Åste. Sorry, carry on. I would come at it from a different angle, because one of the exciting things for me is that you displace the site of labor, and so work can take on asynchronic qualities that allow you to envisage works that either can be dipped in and out of, that are smaller than the 2 hours traffic of the stage necessary to make it financially viable, that don't necessarily require a venue with a certain number of people there. So many of the constraints that determine the way in which a lot of theatre looks like can be bypassed or circumvented and come up with other sort of experiences. It could be that the determining factor is not, if you like, the availability of a particular performing troupe at that time, but you create an experience unlike this one that is actually multiplayer. So you're needing to find an audience. It's like, you know, the character's in search of an audience before the piece can actually be realized, because otherwise you cannot viably experience this. So you actively, if you like, gather together those people who will have this experience with you, rather than turning up at a place where that experience is deemed to take place.
That's super interesting. That feels a bit like related to the Neil Stevenson idea of the reactor, the actor, the live actor, as a kind of a primary mover in this kind of space, where a lot of the other elements of theatre production have been kind of already taken care of, I guess. Yeah, I'm really interested in that. I'm really interested in the sort of potential and the potential for liveness and live interaction with actors, and as a kind of something that's not very accessible currently through because of the types of costs and production models of live performance, and how virtual spaces could make that more accessible. But that's my little hobby horse in this. There's some really interesting other questions being asked here as well. Nadia Luton, again, apologies if I'm mangling your name. She asks, it would be interesting piece of audience research to see how experiences and feelings varied for different forms of mixed reality presentations of the same piece. Fascinating insights. Thank you again. I'm guessing that's in a response to the different stagings of Agamemnon. Sorry. Yeah.
But equally, I think it tees up the notion that from the get-go, you might build the experience with the intention that it has to be gone through several times to actually reveal the breadth of what happens, which is a feature of many video games, where you make certain decisions along the way that determine the path that you end up taking, which give it replayability, and maybe that is something that might inform future kind of work in this area, that you actually make interventions as an audience member that definitively change the outcome or the direction of the piece.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess like you said, there's more game writing of that sort, but I'd be very curious to see what kind of theatre writing could emerge in response to that kind of more exploratory model of audience participation, I guess. Unlike immersive theatre, where it's very difficult to really deliver sort of playwriting in that sense, in a way it feels like an opportunity for playwriting to sort of re-enter this form in some ways.
It's a good challenge, and I think it comes in a way to a rather long-standing discussion about the relationship between spectatorship, which is not necessarily passive, but to do with receiving story and presentation, and participation, which is more to do with agency. And I guess part of a writing function in this is to have a handle on what degree of agency there is for the visitor or the participant. And I'm very cool with, as it were, just spectatorship. And that, in a way, is what we were working with the Agamemnon project, which in two of its iterations was end-on, involved being very frontal, watching actors, looking at you, and watching a screen in a very filmic sense. But I think thinking about writing for a VR environment is different, because you're not necessarily writing a narrative journey. You're writing the experience of a set of opportunities to engage with material, which might composite themselves as narrative, but might be experienced very differently by different participants. So it's sort of inherently more plural in that sense. Whether that's a good thing, or a sort of more manageable thing or not. I'm not sure, but I don't want to say that it's more difficult or less manageable. I just think it requires a different head. But people who are fluent in gaming, for instance, will already have that head, I expect.
It'd be interesting to see people from more of a games background, I guess, move into or making theatre experiences. I'd be quite curious about people moving in that direction, as opposed to the sort of what feels like it's happening more of theatre makers maybe increasingly drawing on game writing and formats. Maya Chowdhury asks, what is the difference between the Reactor and the Spect actor in VR theatre?
Well, I think in a way this is the similar question, dilemma, opportunity, and comes down to agency, which comes down to the choices that are available for you. And I think in the Sonnets project that Tim and I have done as well, it's largely what we're offering really is audience experience rather than participant agent experience, I think. And if we were to move further down that route, there'd be another set of thinking to be done about, what it is that you drive yourself as the visitor to the world. And Tim mentioned, I think even yesterday actually, in our discussion about the prospect that any visitor could change the world and leave their own trace. So that would be an interesting way of being human about it, actually, in the virtual environment, that you visit, you leave your mark in some sense, and other people can understand that and kind of, thicken the world, if you like.
Mm. I think for me as well, I guess the sort of notion of the Reactor is very attractive to me in the kind of work that I'm doing. But I think to really deliver on the possibilities of that, you need ways of representing the audience member within that virtual space in a way that gives the reactors something to react against or react to. So you'd need to be able to know something meaningful about your audience member, and I think there's very exciting possibilities in there, but probably a little on the side of the subject of today. But yeah, I think that's an interesting horizon to watch.
Yeah. I was just going to add to that notwithstanding trying to get the Mac version of this on its feet, Apple allowing, the thing that really interested me in anticipation of lockdown easing is actually taking it to a proper VR platform, be that Oculus or whatever, but in particular to expose it to a multiplayer environment, because then the onus necessarily has to shift between sole attention on the thing, the pre-prepared material, and to then think, why are there multiple people in this space, and how do they exist together in this space, and what might they do together in this space, and how does that then respond and react to the initial stimulus that you previously provided.
So just in conclusion, it's been fantastic talking to you both today and seeing, getting a little bit of insight into what you've been working on as well. Have you got some particular next steps for this project and ways that our online audience can engage with it?
Well, just to reiterate what I said, I think to actually make it available for VR hardware would, if you like, close the loop of where we started from with this, and ideally to do that in a live situation. So we've necessarily had to go down the route of providing a deliverable, but to provide a provocation in an actual space with a live audience, I think would make us feel that we could temporarily at least close the door on this project. It does feel still like unfinished business from my perspective.
Right.
And while Tim said that, there are 154 sonnets, and we did think at one point, would it be over grand to think that you could produce the set whereby if anyone were interested, they could access any one of the sonnets.
Amazing. And where is the best place for audiences to stay informed of progress on this project or your work in general?
I'm trying to put kind of tutorials and documentation of the project because I'm as keen to kind of evangelize people in the theatre world picking up this technology because it's enthused me. So I created a WordPress site called xrperform.com, which is somewhat skeletal at the moment, but I'll be adding tutorials, screen grabs, commentary, and various other things there. So if you want to check out there, that might be a good starting point.
Fantastic. Maybe would it be possible for you to share that in the Twitter stream, perhaps, so people can pick up from there? Fantastic. Okay, thank you so much, Andy and Tim. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everybody watching online.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.